with John, who's one of our Baptist ministers and also is supported by one of our home mission funds. So John, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm John. So yeah, I'm 53. I've been a pastor for 21 years, and I've been a Christian for about 25 years. That maths doesn't add up, so that was never my strong point, maths. Anyway, I got saved when I was about 22, so just completely ignore all the years I was just talking about. Yeah, I wasn't brought up in a Christian family. I wasn't. We sort of went occasionally to church when I was younger, and I came to university in Swansea to do an English degree. I met students through a project where I was volunteering, and I could tell there was something different about these people. I guess I was driven into the voluntary work or the community work by a sense of kind of duty, I think, and a want to pay back maybe. And I got really angry at lots of social injustice that I saw, and they were serious about the injustice, but they weren't angry like I was. So I think that was the first difference that I noticed. And I think my experience up to that point was just religion, and so I really wasn't interested in religion. And I began to hear these Christians talk about a relationship with God like it was real, and he was a real person, and that Jesus Christ wasn't historic. He was present now, and I just didn't understand that. And then a friend of mine became a Christian, and I'd never seen somebody become a Christian before. So about 3 weeks of talking, asking her questions, I mean, she was never going to have the answer. Until the end, she was saying to me, look, John, all I can tell you is Jesus is real, and he stepped into my life. And I was cheeky enough to say stuff like, oh, you went to the spa, did you? And there he was in his sandals buying cheese at the counter. And she said, I know it doesn't make sense, but the spirit of Jesus has met up with me. And anyway, through a prayer meeting I went to and spending time with some friends, I gave my life to Christ. That's the right language, but he saved me, and I knew I was alive and loved and washed clean. I was really aware of my sin, and Daddy knew everything about me, but he still chose to die for me. And that was on a Tuesday, and then on Saturday I thought I better go to church. And the first church around the corner from me was Baptist. Didn't have a clue what that meant. It was everything reason I stayed away from church. Old, like out of date, just words I didn't understand. But the guy that was preached the Bible, and he absolutely believed God, and God was there. I think that was a really important early lesson for me, that no matter what all the ins and outs and ups and downs of church life is, and people upsetting you or not upsetting you, the key reality is that Jesus is there. He's there as the head of his people. He's among his people. He ministers by his Holy Spirit to his people. I know he does that to us all the time, but when these people gather, there's a different kind of manner or way of him being there, and I knew that. And the fact my shirt was sticking to the pew and the books smelt like they'd been in the cupboard for 1,000 years, I just didn't care. So I went along to the church for about 4 or 5 years, and then eventually sensed God called me into ministry, and I thought, oh no, I couldn't buy it. It's like social suicide to become a Christian. You're going to expect me to be a pastor, are you? So we had a bit of a fight over that one for about 6 months, and then I went to train, and I was in Cardiff for 3 years, and then God called me to this quite run-down housing estates, not naturally where I would go, I guess. And I got married just like the week before I started college, and my wife and I were kind of struggling with how long we should stay here, and that was 22 years ago. And we're still here. So, and we've really sought God, and we've we've followed calls that we thought were calls to other places, but no, this is where he said stay. So yeah, now we have 2 children, 1 7 and 1 2, and that's a whole other miracle of grace. But yeah, fantastic. That's me.
So you've been there for just over 20 years. Tell us about the church, what it's like, where it was and where it is now.
Well, it's was started in 1952 by a deaconess that was sent up from Mount Pleasant, which is the big Baptist church in the centre of town. So it was always a church plant. There wasn't a building. She was just doing work with women on this new estate that was built just after the war, mostly mums, and then they started a Sunday school, children's work, and then eventually they were given a plot of land by the local authority, and they built the church building. I think, but a couple of good few years after the church itself had been going, and so that building, it really is still there. The original building. So it's very much mid-50s and looks like that. It's at the end of a posh word cul-de-sac, estate word dead end, but that's where it is. Sometimes it feels like a bit like the dead end. But when we got here, they hadn't had a pastor for about, at least full-time pastor, working for about 15 years, and the church had really run down, and it was very, very stuck in the 20 years beforehand. I think it was we got here in 1997, but it felt more like 1981. It was really hard going, and we were just like the first 3 years honeymoon. This is absolutely awesome and amazing. We love it. But then the reality hit, and we did see some people get saved in the early days, and come in with some really great fresh vision. And then they just couldn't cope for varying different reasons. And that, I think when the last one of that batch left, we were just like, no, we can't. But we did, and we stayed, and we kept working, and then slowly God began to bring about renewal, and that renewal began to stick. And again, some left, but slowly, the church really has, I mean, to me, it doesn't necessarily feel like it, but looking back, it has transformed really. And the focus much more, I think, is about people rather than practices. It's more about fellowship and growth, with all the challenges that come with that. So, yeah, and I think it's probably the last 7 or 8 years that really things are beginning to take off.
Brilliant. So what's been happening in those past 7 to 8 years?
Well, I guess the initial thing started where we took a good serious look at our finances, and we realized we were about 6 months away from collapse. So we had to do some radical praying and thinking, and I basically told the leadership at the time they had to put me on notice really, because I just didn't think they were going to sustain it. And around the same time, we'd come into relationship with a church from South Korea, and they felt that God was leading them to make available to us a tithe fund that they put aside, and that really helped us out of the hole. And what we did at the time, we sort of thought, well, we need this to get out of this particular situation, but we can't think that God has made this opportunity available to us merely just to keep going business as usual. We feel perhaps he's calling us to something radical. So we sat down and we thought, well, let's take a look at the city and the needs across the city, and what can we say? It didn't take us very long really to realize that while there were new churches starting and churches were growing across the city, they were the sort of like the big sort of cross city churches that were drawing people from lots of different areas, or they were in how shall I put it nicely? They were in nice areas of the city, whereas the local authority estates, of which there are many in Swansea, there were not all that many new churches starting in those areas. So we came up with this big, bold vision of If Lose, an initiative for life on Swansea's estates. The idea being, if you keep your life, then you're going to end up losing it. But if you lose your life for Christ and for his great news, then you'll gain. So we decided to do that, and we thought we'll aim for the estate that is the, in terms of the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation, is the most deprived in Swansea, but was actually quite close to us. So we started them in talks with this church that we would start doing some pieces of work on that estate, and we did. We started that about 5-6 years ago, and much of what we've done has gone really well, and that's actually been part of the problem, that it's gone so well. We get a bit like, oh my gosh, everything we do is working, and we can't sustain it. So we the last kind of bit of work we did there that went really well was a few messy churches in the local youth centre, and we had about 40 people coming along to it. But we've always struggled with, we're a church with too many Indians and not enough chiefs. And so people to actually take the role of running something, that was a big problem. So it really hit a wall last summer. And out of that, we approached the Message Trust. And now we'd sort of developed a bit of a relationship with the Message, because they'd run Higher in the Higher Tour in Southwest Wales, and there were very few churches actually in the Swansea area that were able to get involved, let's say, but we were, and went into the schools where we've got about 9, between 9 and 11 young people in our church, and these are the two schools where most of them went. So I went along to that anyway. It just all transpired. It was completely amazing, and through that we got connection with an organisation called Nicodemus, who raised some funding for us to hire the Message bus, or the Eden bus, which is like a double-decker youth centre, which we used for some outreach youth work, which is ongoing up until the crisis that we're in now. And it's amazing building relationships with very unchurched young people. And we did that in order to take it into Blind and Mice. So we started off sort of practicing a little bit in Gendros, although a youth ministry opened up there too, where we needed a chief and didn't have one, but there we are, that's another story. So we've been taking it up to Blind and Mice, and so we thought, well, let's approach the Message. And they are we're pretty much we were almost about to launch until we had to shut everything down for the crisis, but once that's over, we're going to launch Eden Blind and Mice in partnership with the Message, which is really a Gendros Baptist Church Christian community planting project, is how it begins. And then the prayer is from that, intentional and incarnational mission and ministry in the area with the Eden team, that will then emerge into a church fellowship that we will nurture as in the early stages, and then, God willing, becomes an independent church. So yeah, that's one of the really exciting ones. And then as we were developing all of that, I had a two-pronged approach from Peter Idris Taylor, who used to be the pastor at York Place in the centre of Swansea, and Tim Daniels, the recently retired Tim. They both rang me up at different times and said, would you consider taking on board York Place Baptist Church? So, I put them on mute, laughed out loud, and then came back and went all pastoral. And I was like, of course, I would love to investigate that call. But actually, the more we thought about it, there's a lot of people from these estates that go into town where York Place is located, and they go to access services, some of which are legitimate, some of which not so much. And we thought, well, actually, that's a really good opportunity to minister to people when they're not in their residential area. And so we thought, well, let's explore it. And that was about 18 months ago. And it's just amazing opportunity. So with that, there's sort of two things that have happened there. One is that we're sort of gently taking on board the people of that church and the ministry there. It's a very, very old building, and a congregation of about 12. But we're also trying to start some new things. So we're about to start an international students. Well, it's not just students, it's an internationals ministry. And we also had started something where we're reaching out to women in the sex trade in Swansea who yeah, big long story to that really, but yeah, just trying to do like a food ministry that kind of is opening up quite quickly actually into a gospel ministry. So
wow, it sounds fantastic. And in all of that, where would you say you are seeing God move really clearly?
well, one of our great challenges is we're not a terribly big, strong, outwardly looking at it, we're not a very big and strong church. So in terms of, we don't have all that many employed givers. So that, there's probably about 6 or 7 of us that actually have employment and give, and 2 of those are employed by the church. So yeah, looking on the outside, it was a bit of a like, really, we should go this route when we, why don't we patch up the boat first, and make sure that we're watertight, and then we'll go into these things. And that's always the challenge, is where you feel God is calling you something, but it looks bonkers, and you sort of, should you? And then, of course, quite a few people were like, I don't know whether this is, because there's a couple of other things I haven't mentioned as well that we're both planning for and seeing happen. Anyway, as you give yourself out in these things, God works in ways that you least expect. So I think it's just the new believers that have come along to the church who, one of the other things we've done is we partnered with 2 other churches in Swansea. One is a Baptist church that I think they are. Look at that. We work with them, and I think they're in the union, but they don't have very much to do with the union at all. I think they are in the union though. And another one's an apostolic church, and we've partnered for CAP Swansea. So we've had a few people come in through CAP. We've had a couple of people come in off the estate. We had a choir director approach us about setting up a community choir. And again, that's sort of, so I think it's just this relational evangelism, slow burn hunger for God. Yeah, those I think are that's the really encouraging bit. And just when you think that you've stretched too far or this isn't going to work, some funding comes along where you least expect it. The Eden thing, we were just like, I don't know how we're going to do, but we're supposed to raise 11,000 for the first year, and then I think it's maybe 18 for the second year. And honestly, we survived hand to mouth where we thought we were going to get this from. And we prayed, and we because we do pray quite a lot as a church. We have regular morning 7 to 8 in the morning prayer meetings, and I didn't even know who the person is. Somebody made an anonymous donation through a trust of £5,000 towards the first year of the Eden Project. I still don't know who that was, but things like that, I wish those happened like every week, but they don't. But those are the kind of things where, when they do happen, and you just think, wow, the slog of the praying and the working and the driving forward, it is, yeah, God really, it's amazing. Yeah.
It is. And in all those joys, you've hinted at it, what have been the challenges for you over the past few years?
Ironically, so I'm preparing myself for this. I came along to the ministers' event just for one day in Saundersfoot in February, and I was sharing with a few people some of the things that God is doing, and there was a bit of a share session in the afternoon, which I really wasn't planning to speak at all. And I think it may have been that lovely old Tim, like, nudged me into saying something, and I drove home on that Tuesday night, and I woke up ready for kind of getting going on the Wednesday, and I had this overwhelming sense of anxiety, which I'm normally quite a glass half full person, and I think that's sometimes what it is. There are the challenges are, did we really hear right from God on this? And sometimes you're not even sure yourself whether you've heard right. But I think, I think one of the thoughts that struck me when we were asked with York Place, I'd rather stand in front of Jesus at the end of it all and say, okay, like X, Y, and Z didn't work, Lord, but we gave it a go. I'd rather do that than stand there and say, yeah, we didn't try that one, and no, we never had a go at that one. I mean, the balance always is that the risks you take are with his church, who he loves, and people who are part of that church. And but yeah, I just think it's better to have a try, really.
Yeah,
But that's the biggest challenge. Like, are we doing the right thing? Yeah,
absolutely. And obviously, your heart is to share Jesus with people, and that comes across so clearly. When we're thinking about in terms of mission, how would you define or describe mission and the mission of God?
Well, for me, mission is clearly communicating who Jesus Christ is and what it is he has done and what it is he is doing now, and that he is calling you to be a part of that. And there's life in what he's calling you to, and then there's not if you ignore it. So that's mission, is that invitation. And then as people respond to the invitation, is the challenge always there is keeping them focused on the grace that is theirs in Christ Jesus, because it's grace to save you and it's grace to keep you and shape you, rather than grace to draw you in. And then once you're in, right, slap bang, here are the rules, you've got to follow all these rules, and which is what people tend to think. But so I never want to like limit mission to like mere verbal gospel communication, but it is that and more. But it's definitely not, you've got to do that, which culturally is uncomfortable. I think it always has been. You've got to do that uncomfortable bit, because it's very, very easy in our situation where there's need everywhere to provide youth work and provide care and provide, which we want to do. But what that is providing youth work and providing care. That's not sharing the gospel. That's sharing your life, which is really, really essential, and you do it. But if you don't speak those words, and I know you can speak them offensively or you can speak them winsomely. I recognize that. But it's still the word, it's still that gospel message. That's the power to save those who believe it. So it's probably not a very good image, but I quite often say to people, you're gently handing people a bomb. It's a love bomb, but when it goes off, it will save people, and you don't get to know when it's going to go boom. But when it does, it will. But you've got to hand it to them. Don't throw it at them and run away. I'm not into that sort of, because actually, constant in the community relational evangelism is quite difficult. But we have a couple of people that do that kind of go into the centre of Swansea and they stand there with an open Bible, and I'm not really sure who they're talking to, and I think it does draw some people, but church ministry in the community is well, it's all tough, isn't it, I suppose. But yeah, does that answer that question?
Yeah, that's brilliant. And if for us as an association and individual churches around, how can we support you and partner with you in prayer?
Do that. Pray, really. Pray that God would. Should know the Bible with this one. I think it's in Colossians where Paul says that every good work of I can't remember where it is, but it's every good work of yours that's prompted by faith will come to fruition. I think that's a good biblical prayer, and a prayer that we would need. That if it's prompted by our faith and in the sight of God, it's a good work, that it will come to fruition. And just to keep having bold faith that people get saved. And we had a lovely gift from a church in the association. Somebody rang me up, ironically, just before everything sort of went into lockdown, and said to me that they had some like extra resources as their year had come to an end, and they budgeted and they had some money left over. And again, it was one of those moments like put them on mute, and I was like, money left over? What's that? I mean, 22 years of ministry, I've got money left over. I was like we'd have like maybe 23p down the back of the sofa. That's the only money we had. But that was so encouraging. Not that I'm looking for that, but that was so encouraging. Yeah, that was absolutely amazing. But really, people praying is really, really key. And yeah, I just love it. You know, I like being part of the association, and I think probably since we responded to Tim and Peter, I probably more. I haven't been terribly good at, in all honesty, being part of association. I don't really like meetings. Am I allowed to say that? I don't really like meetings, and I'm not a great fan of reading minutes and stuff. And I tried in the early days of ministry, and I think sometimes when there's so much ministry to do, getting involved in the administration of things, which at the time, that's how I felt. To be part of the association and to be involved with the association was basically being involved in the admin, and that just wasn't my thing. And particularly being on the western, I know we're not like Broadhaven West, but on the western edge of the association. And I thought, I really don't want to travel like 40 miles to be caught up in an admin meeting. But I'm really valuing it more now. I think I'm just seeing more. And yeah, I mean, I remember when the Baptist Union made that brave decision to reorganize everything around mission rather than around ministry. But that was a long time ago now, but it just shows how long it takes to reorganize everything around something. But I think it's, well, in my experience, I'm beginning to experience that now, and I really value that. So, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Not only things to pray for, but pray for the association, which I always love. That's fantastic, and unprompted, which is even better. So thank you. Thank you, John. We will continue to pray for you in your mission and ministry as in the coming weeks and months ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.